So I've put Pastor Larry Kirkpatrick, Joel Mellons, Hank Filyun, is that correct? Filyun, and Jonathan Zirkle here. And could you just briefly introduce yourselves? Pastor Larry Kirkpatrick, then Joel, then Hank, and then Jonathan.
I am Pastor Larry Kirkpatrick. I serve presently in the Michigan Conference. I've got a couple of churches here, Muskegon and Fremont. If you basically started Berrien Springs and go 100 miles straight north as the crow flies, you'll land here. Glad to be working in Michigan Conference, and I've been in pastoral ministry for, I don't know, pretty close to 30 years. And loving present truth in Jesus every step of the way.
Amen. Praise the Lord. And Pastor Larry, I think you have your own YouTube channel or something like that.
Right. I've got a little channel, Larry, the guy from Michigan. I put up devotionals every morning, a little 3 or 4 minute devotional, video devotional. And I do videos every now and then on usually 2 or 3 different ones a month on a different topic. I book review, just did one on CBDCs, you know, the central bank digital currencies they're working out. And I have my website, greatcontroversy.org, and I have a podcast over at subscribestar.com/Larry the Guy from Michigan. And that podcast focuses on how to live as a Christian in times of soft totalitarianism. And so that's a pretty tiny niche, but I would think it would be larger. But anyway, we're trying to understand the times that we're living in and do it without compromising our faith in Jesus.
So are these target audiences Christians or Adventists or non-Christians, or what are these target audiences?
For the YouTube stuff, it's anybody who, you know, comes along. I kind of go for everybody. So it wouldn't be quite as Adventist centric, but if you're an Adventist, you'll hear it all the way through. So
if you could, just for the sake of time, could you share your links here on the chat, and then we'll
sure, in the chat. Yeah, I'll do that after.
Sure, and then we'll want to support you.
Sure. Yeah,
okay.
And the podcast is for everybody, but I think everybody in there's an Adventist. So
okay, thank you. And then Joel, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Joel Mellin from Sweden, and we have a ministry here, me and my wife, and we are we have a health food store where we try to encourage people to eat good food and to tell them about the health message in different ways. We also have a web shop where people can order at mellins.nu, and then I am having lectures all over Sweden in health, but also other subjects. I'm educated meteorologist, have studied nutrition as well. I'm working also as a meteorologist, I'm giving lectures about the weather basically to pilots.
Okay.
And I like very much the church, the message of the church, and I see that it's coming close to an end now, this time in the world, and really want to get out the message. And I also enjoy to take part in the different activities that the church is doing, and like to also update myself about the leadership in the church, what happens, and so on.
Thank you very much. You know, before we go to Brother Hank, Jonathan, could you introduce yourself, and then we'll introduce Hank and he can start sharing.
Sure. My name's Jonathan Zirkle. I'm really a trial attorney by trade. That's my main career, but I've been very interested in religious liberty I've actually been dabbling in the area of religious liberty for quite a few years. And then recently, now that this pandemic has turned into a big deal, the religious liberty issues have come to the forefront. I work with the Liberty and Health Alliance. I'm the vice president for religious liberty. And if you haven't gone there, I urge everyone to go to our webpage, libertyandhealth.org, and sign the document that we have there. I think it's an important document. And I do think that the signatures we get could have some influence upon the General Conference.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we're going to bring you back shortly. I will ask, we're going to ask Brother Hank. I'm going to ask you to unmute, and then could you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm just going to say hi because it's midnight here, and I've got a few friends and family members dialing in from different time zones, so good day wouldn't be appropriate. But and that's also why I'm doing it with a chopper headset. Most of the house is asleep, but we're really grateful for Medical Missionary team to step up and provide us with a platform. Because what I'm going to discuss today is me as a layman who historically has not been involved very much in church administration and global church leadership, the shocking realization of how they've basically put the thumb on the scale to the detriment of the membership in regards to religious liberty, and specifically on the matter of religious exemption when it comes to vaccine mandates. So I was quite glad when you said me to do the last of the introductions, because it's more or less part of the presentation that I would like to share. So if you don't mind, then maybe I can start the share and we can journey through our story. So let me just navigate the technology.
And, you know, before you start, I just want to share with people how we have come into contact with each other. Brother Hank reached out to me and asked if we could just ask to find other like-minded Adventists who are interested in this subject of what was happening in the church in the area of religious exemptions. And after calling him and talking with him, we just thought that it would be a good subject to bring up, because this is highlighting, as he said, a layperson and what they did, what a layperson did to try to make a difference in the church. And this is what we're all trying to do. So thank you very much, brother.
Thank you, Joyce. Yeah, so what we're sharing on screen is a platform that I've named Pearl. Pearl is for the platform encouraging autonomy and religious liberty, but specifically for SDA members. So we're certainly not going to be a political or a social movement. We just want to promote religious liberty and medical autonomy amongst SDA members. Now, where does Pearl exist? Pearl at the moment is just a group on the Telegram messaging app. And if you would want to join, the link has been provided and it's displayed on screen. And I'm pretty sure if you just search in Telegram, you'll find the Pearl group. And the intention of the group is to coordinate the campaigns that we're running. And we'll talk about those campaigns a bit later, but also to share information. Now, right now, we're sharing the contact details of the leadership who are to be contacted in regards to the immunization statement. Now, the different campaigns where you would require to contact them would be, firstly, the easiest to do, an individual letter expressing concerns on the 2015 immunization statement. Now, we'll go through some of those concerns just to set you at ease. But for now, I have taken it upon me to draft a letter, and you are welcome to use it as a template, and to wherever the thoughts already captured agree with your concerns, you're welcome to use it, or you're welcome to just refer to it, use it as a source of inspiration and draft your own letter. But we want to encourage individuals to make their voices heard, and to do it so in a letter format, just because it lends a bit more weight. Sometimes email or contacting through a web browser in the contact us section is not very effective. But once you sign a letter, it seems like there's more engagement and traction on it. The second campaign is the congregational letter of a business meeting vote to reject the 2015 immunization statement and the 2021 affirmation. So again, both these letters are available in template form on the Pearl Telegram group, and you're welcome to go and download them there and then tailor them to taste. Now, when it comes to successes we've had so far, the most notable will be an article that was published in the Fulcrum magazine, online magazine, in regards to a congregation's vote to reject these statements. So and I'm not sure if we can share multiple screens. Is the Pearl Telegram showing on screen?
Yes, the Pearl Telegram is showing on screen.
And then I'm also just showing the Fulcrum article where you can see Church in Namibia petitions GCXCOM.
That's not
withdraw.
showing there, but the link is there. And I'm going to ask you to maybe copy and paste that onto the chat here when you're done speaking.
Good. Okay, we'll do it that way. So now, who are we? So Pearl, as I said, look, I'm a lay person. Thus far, it's a collection of lay SDA members. We're members in good standing, as far as I know. We don't check up with everyone's congregation, but we're trying to attract concerned and members in good standing. I myself and my brother, we are the most active on the platform. We're both elders of the SDA Church. We're lay preachers, volunteer missionaries. We've invested our personal time in support of the SDA Church. However, while we've both been very invested in the church, and we come from a family that's very invested in the church in terms of local contribution, we've never been active in oversight of the general conference or the central administration of the church. And today I feel that was a regrettable blind spot and a false comfort from my side. I always trusted that the leadership is on course and doing the right thing for the church membership. Now, in terms of Pearl, again, I just really want to emphasize this point. We're concerned about the church, and we're concerned about SDA members within the church. We are not anti-vax. We're not anti-science. And you'll see when we deal with the actual contents of our letters of objection, that the contents is not getting into medical debates or getting into a discussion on the efficacy of vaccines. We're solely focused on what the SDA Church's position should be and who has the authority to clarify that position. So chiefly, we are concerned about a perceived usurpation of the global SDA Church name by a small committee. And that committee does not seem to be accountable to the SDA membership. And that committee has made statements to the detriment of the religious liberty of individual members of the global SDA footprint. Now, the basic understanding of Pearl is that there is a prophetic calendar, and the world is experiencing a progressive fulfillment of that calendar. And Pearl is not attempting to interfere with the advancement of God's prophetic calendar. And we understand that prophetic calendar might involve evils that will be allowed to occur. And as we understand the Bible, that will be temporary, but temporary can be for a long period of time. And we're not fighting against God's prophetic calendar. Thus, we're not seeking social, economic, or political relief. We're not campaigning in those fields. However, the prophetic calendar does not suggest that we should have tolerance for or acceptance for these end-time threats to the church within the church. Thus, Pearl is campaigning strictly to influence for correction of what we see as objectionable statements within the church, trajectory that we identify in the church that we find troublesome. Now, Pearl members, to clarify further, we're not anti-vax, we're not political, we're not social, but our understanding of the current situation, specifically the pandemic situation, and the proposed treatments and the authoritarian solutions is through a context that is provided by prophetic symbolism found in the book of Daniel. So if we look at the book of Daniel, we find that in chapter 1, we know that Daniel and his 3 friends were faced with what they deemed to be a health test, to consume the food from the king's table. And they fell. Now, nowhere does it say it was unclean food. Nowhere does it say it was food offered to idols. And we can speculate. But at the end of the day, Daniel and his 3 friends felt that consuming that food, whether it was in line with any doctrine or dogma or whatever, they felt for them personally, consuming that food would not be to the honor of God. And they themselves said that they would prefer to partake of vegetables and water. That was their position, and they saw that as a health test. And that health test of Daniel chapter 1 was a precursor to the worship test of Daniel chapter 3, when it came to the mandated worship of the golden image. Now, so too, we see parallels with that initial health test preceding the worship test in what we can see here in our current pandemic situation, where everyone is now being told that you must take a certain treatment. And we have questions about whether that could be done in good conscience in terms of how it impacts our health. And we see that as a precursor, because along with that suggestion, that mandate, that requirement to take this health treatment right now, there is a number of authoritarian control mechanisms being established, which could very quickly be recalibrated to focus on freedom to worship, how you worship and who you worship. So we can see parallels there. And that's why we as Pearl members frown upon what we see as aberrant and regrettable statements in support of certain medical treatments, which we do not find present in the Bible. So this then brings us to the concerns. This is what Pearl is concerned about in regards to these statements. Now, I don't have time to read the whole statement. You certainly can go and check on the 2015 statement on immunization. But this statement makes it very clear that it is not a statement voted in a full GC session. It is a statement of the GC Administrative Committee. Now, this is our main concern, that GC ADCOM is usurping the power to make statements on behalf of the global SDA Church, and that this statement by GC ADCOM is not the regular and established SDA denominational order, where SDA statements are voted by delegates in a full GC session. Thus, I fear GC ADCOM has hijacked the global SDA Church's name, and this not being voted in a full GC session cannot be representative of the SDA Church's position. Now, I understand they've defended and they say that administrative committee has the right to make these statements, and I find that laughable. But regardless, even if they feel they have the right, I would still say that that right needs to be severely curtailed. And here's a very common sense proposal. Imagining that there ever is a situation that is so urgent that GC ADCOM must rush to produce a statement in between proper GC sessions, then any of those statements not made in proper GC session must be submitted for ratification at the next full GC session. I cannot imagine why they would not go down that path, because right now they've created a worse situation where the Adventist Church is speaking out of 2 mouths. There's the GC session, which has the weight and authority of the global membership delegates behind it. And there's GC AdCom, which is a much smaller group. And as we can clearly see, we struggle to establish whom they are accountable to, and we struggle to hold them to account. So in terms of origin, it is not a great idea to have GC AdCom speak on behalf of the church. And imagining some scenario where they should be allowed to speak on behalf of the church, it makes no sense to leave their statements cast in concrete, but rather it makes more sense to have those statements be submitted at the next proper GC session for ratification, where we can restore any statements back to good order so that these statements can stand alongside all other statements produced through GC session. So that's already one proposal which we can suggest to our delegates who are right now attending GC and say, insist that all statements outside of full GC must be submitted at the next GC. It must be on the agenda and it must be regularized through ratification at the next GC. So that's in terms of origin. Now, let's look at the content. First, the statement conflicts with the 28 fundamentals. This statement promotes peer-reviewed scientific literature as a basis for the Adventist emphasis on health, alongside the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. And we interpret spirit of prophecy as referring to the writings of Ellen White. Now, the 28 fundamentals, nowhere in the 28 fundamentals is there a reference to peer-reviewed scientific literature. So how can the GC AdCom suddenly promote contemporary peer-reviewed scientific literature to be on par with what the 28 fundamentals states? Firstly, the 28 fundamentals opens with an introduction which very clearly says sola scriptura, the Bible and the Bible alone. And then the 28 fundamentals discuss the gift of prophecy. And when discussing the spirit of prophecy, that's where they introduce the works produced by the spirit of prophecy through the inspired writings of Ellen White. But nowhere does the 28 fundamentals suggest that peer-reviewed scientific literature should in any way be a basis for the health message of the SDA Church. Now, it was essential to include peer-reviewed scientific literature in this statement, because without peer-reviewed scientific literature, there would be no statement. Because immunization and vaccination and, broadly applied to all similar technologies, it is entirely absent in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. So this trick of promoting the unscriptural, uninspired, peer-reviewed scientific literature was essential to produce the 2015 statement. Now, also included in the statement is what I consider the false imperative. The statement says that they have no religious or faith-based reason not to encourage. So you can see the double negative there. Now, does a double negative comprise an imperative? Because they have no religious or faith-based reason not to encourage, it doesn't mean that they have a religious or faith-based reason to encourage. In a situation like that, if the Bible and the spirit of prophecy is silent on vaccination, then shouldn't GC AdCom also remain silent? Just because there's no reason to object to vaccination doesn't mean they must come out in support of it. I mean, there are many aspects of our modern life that the Bible is silent on. I mean, we can talk about computers, we can talk about artificial foods that are now being created in labs. Somehow GC AdCom has refrained from pronouncing statements on those. But they could not resist the temptation of remaining remaining silent on vaccinations. They had to proceed and go and make a statement on that. I find that very, very concerning, very curious. Why specifically on vaccination? If they admit that they could not find any reason to encourage, but they also could not find any reason not to encourage, just remain silent. Then also the statement includes herd immunity. Specifically, the section reads, encourage our adherents to responsibly participate in protective and preventive immunization programs. We value the health and safety of the population, which includes the maintenance of herd immunity. Now, this I also find baffling. GC AdCom decided to endorse a medical intervention on healthy people. the vaccinations are intended for healthy people. However, in the Bible, we don't find treatment of healthy people. We find a biblical approach of quarantining and treating the sick. The Bible does not say go and treat healthy people. The SDA beliefs regarding the coming from the Bible, being drawn from the Bible and from Ellen White, these contain health principles that are based on nature's remedies. Nature's remedies are deemed sufficient. And that is what the SDA health emphasis has always been based on, natural remedies. Now, anything beyond that, I'm not saying is evil. I'm also not saying it's good. I'm saying anything beyond that should be left to the individual for them to determine whether it is suitable for them based on their personal circumstances. We cannot afford official church statements. Just because the Bible and because Ellen White is silent on it doesn't mean the church can take a position on it. That would be adding to Scripture. So just remain silent on it. Now, what troubles me even more about herd immunity is herd immunity was defined in 2015 to include natural immunity derived from infection. But in 2020, it was redefined to only refer to vaccination. Yet, GC AdCom has not done any revision to the 2015 statement. However, the language that they use has been redefined. So how can we still have confidence in that statement if the words that are being used in that statement are constantly being redefined? For that matter, even the word vaccination or vaccine has been redefined. Now, finally, the concerns as it relates to religious liberty and mandates. Members may have a legitimate religious objection to vaccination mandates. We're not saying you've got to object to all vaccines, but certainly we have a concern when it comes to vaccination mandates, for it could violate our conscience. Romans 14:23 says very clearly, for whatsoever is not of faith, that is sin. And a number of us do not have confidence in the vaccines that are being mandated. And therefore, we have a burden of conscience. Now, the consequences of GC AdCom making this 2015 statement is an undermining of SDA membership when they are seeking religious exemption to vaccine mandates. Because you'll be going to your employer or whichever authority that is mandating you to take the vaccine, you'll say, I have a burden of conscience. I don't believe that this is of faith, and therefore for me it is sin, and therefore I would like a religious exemption. And what will your employer or the approving authority do? They will immediately go to the internet, do a search on which church are you from, and then they will say, but your church is in support of vaccination, completely undermining your religious liberty as a member of the church. So this is a summary of our concerns on the 2015 statement. Now, as I said, it is not immediately apparent to a layperson how to hold GC AdCom accountable for this statement. So the only mechanism I could find is the mechanism of the widow. So she, in Luke 18, verse 1 to 5, was pleading with an unjust judge. And she kept pleading with him. She persisted in pleading until such time as the judge relented. And he finally gave heed to her pleading. And unfortunately, that's the position we find ourselves in. There's no one who's going to support us in the leadership. There's no one who's going to be enthused in this regard. We, as individuals, have to persistently raise our voice like the widow, appealing to the unjust judge. Be it by emails, be it by letters, be it by calls, raise your voice. Now, I'm trying to add some discretion. Please don't go on anti-vax, anti-science, anti-medicine tangents. There may be valid information there. What I'm just saying in terms of the church's position, I feel we have a stronger argument if we focus on the origin and the conflict between the content of the statement and the 28 fundamentals. I think that would be much easier for membership universally to see the problem, as opposed to driving a vax, anti-vax division in the church. Let's just focus on these statements are in conflict with the 28 fundamentals, which I feel is quite easy to prove, as we've done here. But raise your voice, and as we've said, there's no agreed or no disclosed process or mechanism for a protest of this nature. And this, unfortunately, is to the advantage of GC ADCOM, but only if we allow it. Now that they've not set a mechanism, let's get creative. So, what are our creative mechanisms? First, you're welcome to join Pearl, our Telegram group, so that we can coordinate and communicate. We have, as I said, a templated letter, which you're welcome to copy, tailored to taste, as long as we don't go off on a tangent that comes across as anti-science, but focusing on the origin and the conflict within this, the statement, the conflict between the statement and the 28 fundamentals. And then submit that to your local conference, your union, your division, and the GC President's office. And we can help you with contact details. We can also share suggestions on how to establish those contact details. Then the second initiative is that of the congregational business meeting vote. And here I would like to test and see whether my brother can tell us a bit more of how they did this. Chris, are you able to unmute?
What is
there?
Chris's last name?
He's under SDA Cedar. There he is.
Okay, yes.
Okay. So just before he starts, to add impetus to the letters that we've been sending, and also, given that we're not taking a vax, anti-vax position, we're focusing on our concerns about harmony with the 28 fundamentals. We discussed within the church in Namibia, the local congregation there, our concerns. And they took it to a business meeting and a vote. And the elder for that congregation will now discuss that process, the approach they took, and the action they took subsequently.
And this is all very important. I just want to make sure, though, we stay on track as far as the time, because we're already quite a bit over. So I'm just wondering, how much more do you have, Brother Hank?
No, this is it.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening.
How about your brother?
Good.
What? Okay. Should you on a screen so we can spot him?
My camera, unfortunately, is not working.
That's fine.
Everybody is asleep here in my house, so I'm also trying to keep it brief.
Okay.
I'll just quickly run through what we did and what we have encountered thus far.
Okay.
We called our business meeting. We had our usual business items on the agenda, and we had this statement, or actually both statements, the 2015 and the 2021 reaffirmation statement. We had both of them on the agenda, and our membership considered those two statements. I'm glad to report that our membership isn't just made of people who are unvaccinated or vaccinated, for that matter. It was a balanced mix of both vaccinated and unvaccinated. And what I'm trying to emphasize here is that in that mix, everybody was of one mind. Such a statement undermines the religious liberty of someone faced with this dilemma of a mandated vaccination. And everybody agreed that it is not up to the Seventh-day Adventist Global Church to decide whether you should or you should not. And that on that basis, our congregation passed the vote to say, let us petition, let us write to GC ADCOM general conference in general, and inform them that our church as a congregation does not agree with the statements that were put out. Just to wrap up what transpired after that, from day one, we were faced with the challenge of how do we inform ADCOM of our business meeting decision. And for that reason, we tried to keep to some sort of channel. So we informed our local conference via the officers in our local conference, similarly the union, similarly the division, and after the division also the general conference, both the secretariat and the president. In response to our letter, our union responded saying, no, we have to submit this in writing to our local conference. Our local conference will then vote on it on their ADCOM and recommend to their EXCOM. Their EXCOM will consider and vote, and if they recommend it, it then goes to the union. Again, at the union level through ADCOM, then EXCOM, then again from the union to the division. And this was very disheartening to learn that somewhere someone has decided all of a sudden there's this process of escalation, what they would like to call it. But it is very, I'll just call it, it's very unfair. ADCOM could make a statement that came directly to each and every member of the global church, but for that member to communicate back to GC ADCOM, you have to navigate past at least 7 or 8 committees to finally reach the origin or the original poster of the statement. And unfortunately, the survivability of such an effort has already been proven in our case, whereas our conference wrote back to us informing us that they do not support our views. Thus, they have not put it on the agenda of their ADCOM. Thus, it will not be discussed. Thus, it will not be recommended any further. And that was the end of our congregational effort. That's just to give everybody a full overview of our situation. Thank you.
And to salvage that situation, and this is where I think having that letter published in Fulcrum has inspired other congregations, members in other congregations, to take similar action. And we would like to encourage more of that. And because of this mechanism, this escalation mechanism that has suddenly been invented, which did not exist before, with the intent of this mechanism to drown the objection. That is why being able to communicate into Adventist media, be it Fulcrum or a similar platform, to broadcast the decisions of the congregations is essential. And that is why we need to coordinate on a platform to ensure that we create maximum transparency on the initiatives. So those were 3 things to do. The 4th thing is to just ensure you know who your GC delegates are and to try and personally influence them. I printed out a letter of objection. I signed it. I handed it to my GC 2022 delegate, and I said to him, "You're going there as my delegate, and therefore I expect you to raise this matter, whether it's on the agenda or not. You raise it in conversation, formal, informal. You ensure that this issue gets airtime." And that's, again, what we want to inspire is, like I said, raise your voice, ensure people know about this issue, ensure it gets discussed, and pull every lever you can. Thank you.
Can I just mention that I'm not quite sure if I understood the whole thing, but when that church voted its position, nobody else has any say. The conference doesn't have any say. The union doesn't have any say. The division, the GC doesn't have any say. A church that considers and legitimately calls a business meeting and votes a position, a letter like you're describing, which I'm quite, I think it was a neat thing. Now, the next level up, the conference or the union or whatever, whether they support it or not, or agree with it, or want to call for some kind of action further on up the ladder, that's another thing. They're in control of their own setting of their own agendas and so on. But as far as the a local church reaching a conclusion and voting a statement like that, that is the decision of that church and business, nobody can suppress that. Nobody can prevent that. That is that's the sovereign decision of that local church. So good on those that process this and hopefully in a godly way and reach their position. So that I think that's those are good kinds of things. Yes, to get it propagated into some kind of action on up through the different degrees of the church there, that's another question. But any local church would be fully within their rights to consider something, process it legitimately, and reach a business meeting decision. And nobody can suppress that. Nobody can prevent that. Nobody can say, well, it's not a legitimate position unless we agree with it. No, that's the decision voted by the local church, done, solved.
Okay, my question is.
I just want to comment on that, Pastor Larry, thanks for confirming. And this is what I don't understand. As members individually, we have nothing to lose. And the church can't take action on you for expressing your dismay at this statement. So please express your dismay. The church, again, cannot take any action on the congregation who votes to reject, and I want to say with contempt, these statements that are so out of line with our 28 fundamentals. The thing is whether we can create enough momentum for more congregations to do that, where there's no loss, there's no, what kind of discipline do they want to enforce? The church manual states that this church is run from the bottom up. But what we see, GC Adcom is now doing a coup and running it from top down. And it's time for the membership to get involved, raise their voice, congregations to vote and reject these statements. And we'll see how quickly the church gets back in line, run from the bottom to the top.
My question though is this, I mean, we can say that the church can make its, can do these business meetings and say, this is what the church believes. What good does that do? What does that accomplish? Individually,
nothing. But if we get 10 to do that, you'll have their attention. If you get 50, because remember, at the end of the day, these leadership positions are also filled by votes. And those congregations are expressing a loss of confidence in that leadership. They'll start to pay attention. Also, you're getting the silent majority. I guarantee you there's a silent majority in leadership who for now, for conflict, for economic conflict, for career conflict, they're keeping quiet. But if congregations start speaking up, I tell you that they will suddenly find their voice and their moral courage to speak up and say, yes, this was wrong. This was a betrayal of our membership. So the only thing we unfortunately can do for lack of a mechanism for accountability is we have to create the momentum, we have to create the awareness, and we have to create the noise for them to be forced to pay attention to this point. And I've read on Fulcrum, this will go to file 13, that letter means nothing. No, it means something. If 50 to 100 congregations did the same, I tell you, we'll have this issue on an agenda somewhere and that statement will be withdrawn.
Is there pressure on pastors, though, not to participate in these, no matter what their congregations think? Maybe Pastor Larry might have a comment on that as well, too, as far as this.
I would say there's different kinds of pressure. I haven't felt any real pressure from my conference. Of course, I'm in Michigan conference, so I'm not sure if we're quite the same as some of the other conferences, but there is an inherent issue in that if you have a congregation, what we got, whatever, 100 members, and they're already divided some which way about these kinds of issues, to actually have a business meeting and have potentially a contention over this and come to a statement and vote the statement and all that. Certainly there would be an inherent caution one would have before one would embark on that kind of a plan, just because you're potentially creating new or facilitating divisions that may already be there. You're just facilitating more division within your congregation. If we're looking at it from a pastoral perspective, you've got 18 things you're trying to keep in order and keep from exploding. And this is one more. So
yeah, because
just kind of talking about the trend.
it just seems like there are a lot of people who believe as we do, but they don't want to say anything. I even know pastors who've reached out to me and they have questions about everything, but they're not speaking up even at their own churches. They're the senior pastors there. And so, Hank, I think that you were, I mean, this is a blessing that your brother is at this church and that this church was willing, the church leadership was willing to do what it's doing, because it seems that most people don't want to have any type of, we all want to be considered to be not troublers of the church. I think those of us who are speaking out, I think we are, I mean, I've never been somebody who was considered to be rebellious or anything like that, but just, you know, me doing this kind of a program, I think puts me on that side, it seems, you know. What do you think, Hank?
Yeah, likewise. I mean, I've never had a bone to pick with the church on any issue. But as I said, I feel that this issue found me.
Yeah.
I was totally unaware of this statement. And then suddenly, the country I was living in goes very authoritarian, very aggressive. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be caught out here. And I know that my natural immunity is strong enough. I can take this virus, I can, be infected, recover, and carry on, and I'll be better off for it. But I'm not allowed that option. And I can see that the government is not really interested in the medical treatment. They like the control agenda that sits behind the infrastructure. That is their incentive to get in this. So I'm thinking I need to find a way out, because they start with the elderly, then the medical employed, and then it moves on to younger and younger age groups. And ultimately, I'm saying, what happens when they target my kids? So that's when I wanted to find what are my options to get out of here. And I was utterly disappointed to see that GC Adcom had gone and poisoned the well in that regard. They've put the thumb on the scale against me and gone and endorsed immunization without even defining. I mean, mRNA wasn't even considered a vaccine. It was a gene therapy. And now just because people call it a vaccine, suddenly their statement is being held against me, and I'm potentially in a situation where I will be coerced or compelled to take this treatment that I don't agree with. And that's where I'm saying, the fight I didn't go looking for the fight, but it found me, and we've got to make our voices heard. And we can be civil. We definitely need to write the letters, be persistent, be patient, but make your voice heard. And back to what we were saying, definitely pastors, they've got enough hot potatoes to handle. They don't need another one. But ultimately, he's also your pastor. Mm-hmm. And if he's going to turn his back on you, best you know that now, right? So I think a moment of crystallization has arrived. I've also reached out to many pastors. Most of them don't respond. A few of them respond covertly and say, we're on your side, but don't know what to do about this. Well, we need to encourage them to develop that moral courage, that boldness to step up and be counted.
Yes, we have noticed that there are many church administrators that they don't want to lose their jobs. And so it is the lay people who are stepping up right now, because the people in leadership, it seems, it's hard, because you don't have religious exemption if you work for the church.
And the disappointing thing, the lay people are disinterested. They have nothing to fear. There is literally no action they can take on you. They can do nothing. Just like GC Adcom thought they had the freedom to make this statement, so too you as a member, you make your statement. Pretty soon they'll see that creates such a mess of statements that it's probably best for them to remain silent, and let's go back to proper order and vote the statements in GC session, and then at least it's defensible. But what happened here is out of order, and it should be shut down.
We have to let Brother Joel speak, because he's in Sweden as well, and it's 1 a.m. for him. And I want to let him speak before he passes out a little bit, but let's ask our questions a little after. Faith, I see your hand, and maybe you can type it in. And Joel says he only has like 10 minutes, and so then after that we can go into a discussion and talk about some other more of these things.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I would say I'm probably one of those just lay people actually that have tried to do my best to contact the GC about this thing. I have always been interested in knowing and following the truth in whatever it is, and I have seen and understood that good leadership is very important, and to have good examples and good role models. And our leaders, they have done much good, but the last years I have seen problems emerging. And my experience is that our leaders are not following through, and in some ways are not fully believing in our special message that we have, both from the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. And for me, it got especially clear that something is wrong during the pandemic. And already before that, I saw with, for example, the issue of women's ordination, that our leadership is not respecting what our delegates voted in San Antonio, for example, 2015, and seemingly does not want to, for example, punish rebellious entities within our world church, as it should have been done by this time, I think. And during the pandemic, the whole church got very, very polarized. And I and many with me hoped and we were waiting for hearing encouraging words from our church leaders, that they would defend our right to personal conviction and personal freedom of choice. And I was expecting to hear that our church leaders would say that many countries have gone too far in their many draconic measures against citizens. But instead of this, we heard most silence in the beginning, and later even sometimes the opposite, that it was correct from the different countries and states to promote strong vaccination campaigns and have strict laws that made it impossible to go to church, for example. And I started to hear and read about Adventists who lost their jobs in, for example, Australia and United States, and not so much here in Sweden actually, but also in other countries. Also reading about laws in Austria, for example, with mandatory vaccination. And also reading about that our own church could not help them to defend their individual rights of freedom of conscience, because the church itself said it was not a question of faith rooted in the Seventh-day Adventist message. And instead, I also saw articles coming up from the ADCOM and the GC Health Department defending, as they say, call it responsible vaccination, with no arguments for the other side. And at that time, I came over this book here, Vaccination, a Petition to the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church by Timothy Perenich and Michael Farris. And that book was kind of an eye-opener to me and others here in Sweden that I have shared this book with, about how we as a church historically have looked upon vaccination and vaccine mandates, for example. And after some time, me and others here also watched sermons of Conrad Vine, especially when he very well, I think, explained why the ADCOM does not have the authority to make those statements it has made. And around this time, our local group here in Sweden decided that we will try to contact the General Conference to write to them. And I wrote this email from our group that, hi, we are a group of Seventh-day Adventists in Sweden, We would like ADCOM to immediately detract all voted documents that are not valid, this including the vaccination statement made 2015. ADCOM does not have the authority to write such a theological statement. This is very clear from the working policy. And then I just got a reply. Thank you for reaching out to us, and we understand your concerns. Here's the link to the Seventh-day Adventist Church statement regarding concerns on COVID-19, church governance, and liberty of conscience. And then the link. And I replied back to them and said, hi, and here is a response to the article that you linked to. And then I linked to the Fulcrum 7 article with the name, a response to the January 26 Adventist Review article on COVID-19 and church governance. And we therefore, again, kindly ask the ADCOM to take away and unpublish the authorized statement about vaccination from 2015. And got another response from the GC saying that, dear Joel and your group, as this January 26, 2022 informational release explains, the immunization statement is authorized as an official statement. And then the last one that we wrote back said, hi, and what we referred to was this article, and we mentioned again this article in Fulcrum 7 that explains that ADCOM does not have the right to authorize it as an official statement. It is not something that they can or should do. So our demand is still there to take down the invalid statement about immunization from 2015 and also other statements that ADCOM cannot make. Only annual council or a general conference in session could make statements like this that speaks for the whole church. This is very clear from both a logical perspective, but also from the working policy. And after that, we have not heard anything from them. But I really think that it would be very much more effective if more people wrote to the GC like we have done. I mean, honestly, I don't think that, yeah, maybe they can ignore 50 persons writing, but if thousands of people, individuals would write and also whole churches would send letters, then it's much more difficult to just ignore. But I think that why it's, for example, here from Sweden, I don't know if there is anyone more that have written to the GC. And I think many don't do it just because they think it has no impact, or they don't even know how to do it, or they have not even heard about these things so much. And I think that we need a leadership that accepts 100% of our special message for our time. And this includes also the whole health message. And our church should not act similar to the guard of forces, or in any way act similar to what the beast will do in the end time, persecuting God's true people that wants to follow their personal conscience on what the Bible and spirit of prophecy says. And right now, I feel that my trust in the leadership is damaged, and that I do not trust that they really will take care of other issues, like, for example, the issue of women's ordination. And I cannot do much more right now from here, I think, but yeah, stay sure that at least I will pray for God's clear intervention at this GC session here.
Cannot hear you, Joyce. You're muted.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm just gonna ask the others to join us again. And thank you, Brother Joel. I'm just gonna ask you, what was the contact information that you used when you contacted the General Conference?
Yeah, I used, let me see.
And
it was an email address that
if you could put that into the chat, that would be wonderful.
Yes,
and then I can share that.
I will do that.
And then this is the other thing. Brother Hank, when he was trying to contact his delegates, he said he contacted all his delegates to let them know how important this information was, because the thing is that despite what we're going through, despite us going through this, I think it's a universal, it's worldwide, this mandate issue, right? Do you know of any country that's not being impacted? And yet our church is not going to put this on the agenda. We have the opportunity this week for there to be a discussion about this subject. And our church leadership, I guess, you know, is it their opinion that it's already been discussed enough? Is it that the membership, maybe because things are kind of lifting, we're now able to go into buildings and not wear masks in every single situation. We're able to go back to church in some countries, but there does not seem to be much interest in pushing for this. And so I'm just wondering, you know, there's a lot of people who believe this way, and yet we are going to go into a GC session that has not met for years. We're going to lose this opportunity to have a discussion about this very important subject. How relevant is the church going to be to the problems in the world? And is this only in the name of, you know, not disturbing the peace? Just wondering what your thoughts are on this. Jonathan, you haven't really shared that much. Do you have a thought on this?
Well, I think it's important for the church to discuss it. I think it's just like you said. One of the things that I'm particularly disturbed with is the fact that if you do look at the GC agenda, it's rather light. And yet, if you actually look at what the church has been through in the last 8 years, it's had some fairly significant things. We obviously have this pandemic that we're talking about right now. And I agree wholeheartedly with everything that's been said about whether this should be discussed or not. My gut feeling is that it will be discussed, but it may not be, you know, I'll just leave it at that. But yet there's other things. I think one thing that should be discussed is the women's ordination issue. Here, you do have a situation where the church has been unable to exert any discipline over its own leadership. And what's very interesting to me is how there's complete lack of discipline in the women's ordination issue, but yet there is severe and strict discipline in the vaccine mandate issue. Very interesting. It's interesting to see what they can do and what they can't do. A third thing that I think should have been on this agenda is the church made a major shift about 4 years ago on its position on abortion. And it's very interesting. There was some, I would just say that that particular shift should be the sort of thing that should be held at the GC level. And I think that there were some aspects of that that were ineffective. If you look, the health department said that they were going to be producing a policy. It's like the annual council came up with the shift of position, and then the health department said that they would write a policy to implement it. Well, they wrote a fundamentally pro-choice policy and not a pro-life policy, and it lasted for less than a week, or approximately a week. And now all we have is silence on that issue. So the church has not been able to manage itself on that issue either. And so we have a problem with church leadership that needs to be fixed. And I think I'm disappointed in the agenda. I feel that, as been said here previously, that for the church to remain relevant and for the GC to remain relevant, two things. One is it must address the important issues of our time. And secondly, it must act with discipline. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to have an iron fist from the GC whenever some kind of decision is made, but there needs to be progress. There needs to be obvious discussion. And you know, if the GC were to make some kind of decision in session and it wouldn't implement it properly in the years between sessions, well, then that should be the first thing on the agenda when you get to the next session is why hasn't it been? Does the GC need to change? How do we fix this? And so there's kind of a lack of discipline in the organization. So I've said a lot, but that's my thoughts right now.
I will say, just from somebody who has been on the inside and, just telling me about how it works, when you get to say some of these meetings, there are people, for instance, when you get to the annual council, apparently a lot of these things have been decided already. And by the time the people who are going to vote these things, some of them have just gotten into office and don't know exactly what is being talked about or what is on the agenda to be voted in. And there are things that are on a consent agenda, meaning that they're not discussed. They're simply put on an agenda and saying, this is what we're going to consent. And so you just say, okay, this is on the consent agenda. Everybody agree to it. And all these new people who don't really know what's happening say, oh, I agree to it. And that's how apparently the vaccination statement was gotten through.
But fundamentally, there's a problem there, because fundamentally it's been said, this is a theological statement, and this really exceeds the authority of any of these organizations, I believe, to make these sorts of statements. So whether it was on a consent docket or not, I'm not impressed by that. Well, secondly, I would just like to say this, is that the basic corporate structure of America, of Europe, of most of the world works on the same kind of system, where you have boards and you have presidents and vice presidents and things like that. And believe me, these boards are very effective. And that's why you have big corporations that are very successful on Wall Street and places like that. And there is no reason why our church cannot operate in an effective governance model. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever.
But when it doesn't happen, you have to ask yourself, why is it that it's happening? Is it because there is another agenda?
Well, and that creates all kinds of problems, because as soon as you start to ask that question, as we can see the problem that Brother Vine has gotten himself into, just by merely asking the question as to why is this? Why could this possibly be the case? Then we run into censorship issues. And yes. The thing in the church is that, and this isn't any organization, but I think it may be more so in an organization like a church, is there is tremendous amounts of peer pressure, this kind of social pressure placed upon people to be silent. And that happens, we see that happening generally in society a lot. It's the whole cancel culture. And I think it's really important for us as church members to kind of like, take a step back and think about how humanity has functioned in years past. And yes. You will find that people were perfectly capable of speaking their mind. In fact, we see that in scripture when we have like the Jerusalem Council in Acts and in the New Testament there. We need to be willing to speak. And even if that means maybe saying something that later on you wish you hadn't have said, it should be okay to say, you know what, I was wrong. But we don't seem to live in a society where you can do that anymore. And it's infected the church.
Jonathan, when you say you're not impressed by this thing being on a consent agenda, you're not saying that that's not the way it happens. You're just saying that.
Well, I think things do happen on consent agendas. That's certainly the case. And that's certainly a bit of trickery that can be used. But I don't know, I don't know exactly. Look, the vaccine statements I was aware of all the way back in 2015, because I've been helping people get vaccine exemptions out here in California for a long time. At the time, I didn't have much sympathy for them, other than I thought that they should have the right to do what they believed. And so I did have sympathy there, and I would help them. But it's interesting with this whole COVID vaccine, I've become much more aware personally of these issues. I don't know how those statements got placed on the whatever official church statements. It may have been a consent thing, in which case that's even, shame on the people that would put that on a consent thing.
That's the thing. This is a small group of people that have been making a big decision for our church members, and it now affects millions of people worldwide. And for whatever reason, it has gone through, it sounds like, some kind of even if it wasn't a consent agenda, it was not something that our church was able to discuss in any kind of reasonable way. And now we have people who are simply saying that people who aren't on mainstream, wavelengths, that we are just anti-science and anti-intellectual and selfish and this type of thing. And so what's going on?
I want to add a couple more thoughts here. Two concepts. One concept is the church has tried to say, well, it's not a spiritual issue because we say it isn't a spiritual issue. But that's not the way the courts try to determine if something's a spiritual issue or not. It's a spiritual issue if one of the parties to the dispute thinks it's a spiritual issue. And then it has to be analyzed as a spiritual issue. So the church really doesn't, it's illogical for them to be able to say just by fiat, it's not a spiritual issue.
And it's making them, they're trying to be the conscience for their church members. And that's
absolutely. Yes. But then this brings up a whole nother really, really big issue. And I think that we have this conversation right now as if it affects the church members, and isn't that a big issue? But honestly, it affects a whole lot more than our church members, because the world doesn't know what a spiritual issue is. And so the world, the courts, the politicians, they look to the churches to see if any of the major churches think it's a spiritual issue. And so by our church not stepping up to the plate and calling something a spiritual issue when it really is, we actually do a disservice to the entire world. And at the same time, we miss a giant evangelistic opportunity and a giant opportunity to just witness for Christ. This is horrible. But at the same time, I've never seen the world, and I'm a student of history, I've never seen the world operate in such lockstep for so long, which leads me to believe that we may be seeing some fulfillments of prophecy. It also leads me to believe that perhaps, and I'm not here to point any fingers, and I don't pretend to know anything that anybody else in the room doesn't know, but I know from what I see, what I sense is that there are worldly influences in the church that have, because the world actually has, that there are powers in this world that care. It affects them what the Adventist church does. And we are not staying true to principle. And even if for some reason we're wrong on the principle, we should be openly debating it. And it is super clear that we are just absolutely wrong on that. That is undebatable, that we're wrong on that particular aspect of this.
Jonathan, could you explain what you mean by there are worldly people who are depending upon the Adventist church?
Well, so there's two classes of people here that both have a stake in what the Adventist church does. One class of people is the average man in the street. It was very interesting. 2 days ago, or two days ago, I was out with some friends and we were eating. And while we were eating, across the parking lot, there was a bank that got robbed. Well, we didn't even notice it until we got out of the restaurant. And we went over and I talked to the cops that were there. And one of my friends decided to tell him I was an attorney and I was a former DA and everything. That got a conversation going. And I ended up telling him what I'm doing with the vaccine mandate. So I'm defending religious liberty. And they're all like, yes, good. We thank you. So these people, there's people out there who have nothing to do with Seventh-day Adventists. They care. And because there's no church that's willing to stand up and say, this is a spiritual issue, every single one of them has an uphill battle to fight to get their religious exemption granted. So that's one group of people that have a stake. There's another group of people that have a stake. And I want to be very careful with what I say here, although some of these people, I think it's fairly undebatable as to which side of the issue they're on. There's the people that own the vaccines, and you have the Bill Gates, you have the people that are high up in the WHO, people that perhaps have an interest in what Dr. Fauci says. These sort of people also have an interest in what we do, because for them, it's important that we shut up and toe the line and that we don't speak. Because if we were to speak, it would change, it has potential to change the trajectory of this entire pandemic, we are one of the few worldwide churches with a worldwide healthcare field with world-class health institutions. And if we were to say, you know what, maybe this is a spiritual issue and maybe some people should be allowed to follow their conscience, that would affect the world. That would be a worldwide headline.
Praise the Lord. Yes, it
Hello.
would be. Mhm.
Hello.
So, Pastor Larry, you have anything to add to this?
To what Jonathan's talking about, or just the whole
The
everything?
whole thing, yes.
Yeah. Well, let me knock 2 or 3 things here. First of all, if there's a consent agenda and you're stuck in a situation where there's a consent agenda, you could move, even if you're nobody, even if you're just one person who's one of the voters, you could say something like, I'm not sure what the exact motion would be, but something like, Mr. Chairman, I move that this particular item, item 23 on the consent agenda, is a very substantial item. I believe it should be considered separately from the consent agenda, and I move that it be stricken from the consent agenda and addressed individually. And I wonder if there's a second for that. You could make a motion like that, and you might be able to get something bumped off the consent agenda and actually addressed in a particular way. Anyway, that's one thought. Second thought, coming back with what Jonathan was just saying, there is a group of pastors, and I'm one of the ones who've signed the statement. It's called clergyforconscience.org. And that is a statement that was prepared by Seventh-day Adventist clergy. These were all Seventh-day Adventist clergy that prepared it. And if you want to find that and look at that, you can sign it. It's kind of like some of these other statements, but this is prepared quite distinctly by pastors from a pastoral perspective. And again, it's not a petition. It's just a statement. It's actually some of us pastors kind of coming out and saying, hey, whatever other statements and beliefs there are in the world, this is what we believe. And we go through, it's just like one page. It's a very simple statement, but very profound, I think. So anyway, you might.
Is that Adventist clergymen, or has it been just clergymen?
For anybody, any clergy person, any lay person can sign it, in fact. But it was prepared by Seventh-day Adventist clergy. That's called clergyforconscience.org, I think is the website.
Okay.
So, it hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but there it is, even though it's small. But I think it's awesome. Now, as far as some of the other things, I see, there's these changes coming in the church manual, and most of the proposed changes are probably of sort of limited consequence. We could talk about particular ones. There is kind of a sneak for women's ordination things in through a couple of these. But I don't think there's a lot of big pieces. I think that there's 3 major issues in the Seventh-day Adventist Church today. There's the issue of unaddressed, and there's many issues, but there's 3 major issues. The unaddressed church discipline on women's ordination for unions and conferences and persons in leadership who have defied the world church will. That is one of the 3 big ones. Another one of the 3 big ones is the increasing suppression of Adventists who are in regular standing, who, whether it's WO or on some of the mandate issues and so on, those people are being suppressed. That's a very substantial issue. And then we have the issue of the church's, basically failure. I mean, it's easy to throw stones. We'd like to talk about all the things we're positive about. There's a lot of positive things in the church. But as far as 3 major, sort of bad issues.
Can we talk about the second issue that you're talking about, which is the suppression of people in the church as far as whether or not we're going to allow them on the pulpit. And so, Natalie Furman, she just had an article that was printed by Fulcrum 7. Have you seen it?
Yes.
I'm sure I have. It's gotten over 1,300 shares. What's it called, Natalie? What is it called?
I think it was censorship and the GC agenda.
censorship and the GC agenda. Okay, so
Mhm.
I would take a look at that. I'm going to share the screen, and I just want to share, this is from the agenda here, and you can see that on page 53 of the proposed agenda for the General Conference, this is looking at unauthorized speakers. This item clarifies who may be invited to speak in the church and address confusion caused by implication that a layperson could not preach because they do not hold credentials. So rather than talking about, unauthorized people needing credentials and this kind of thing, it says this: authorized speakers, only speakers worthy of confidence will be invited to the pulpit by the local church pastor in harmony with guidelines given by the conference. So my question is this: now we've had Stephen Bohr, who, he was invited to the Rocky Mountain Conference, but then they said, well, the church that invited him could still have him, but they were not allowed to let anybody know that he was speaking there. No flyers could be, distributed, and they couldn't really say that he was someone that was approved by the conference. And so basically he was not able to speak there. I think there was a pastor in Zambia who was terminated because he had criticized I think it was the president of the conference in Zambia.
It was the Zambian president.
Okay, the Zambian president, what did he do?
So he is a Seventh-day Adventist, and he met with the Pope on a Sabbath on behalf of country business issues. And this unnamed pastor, at least unnamed to me, I wasn't able to find his information, he criticized the Zambian president for meeting with the Pope on the Sabbath, and he was summarily dismissed.
Okay, so he is no longer safe for the pulpit, according to the conference. Who's the third one?
Let's see, the third one, well, actually there are 4. I forgot to include a link. So there was Walter Veit, Doug Batchelor, let's see, the pastor from Lukasaka, I think, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but the class class that I forgot to include was, there were 30% of the pastors of at least 2 conferences. I believe one was the Kentucky, Tennessee conference, and the other one was it Indiana? They received those conferences received letters ahead of the Supreme Court ruling stating that the pastors that did not intend to go along with the vaccine mandates could expect to pack their bags, and it was anticipated that that would be 30% of those conferences. And since I have the floor, I would just like to say with Hank and the others that there are many issues going on in our church. I am disturbed a lot about the issues, but the overall umbrella issue is the issue of kingly powers, and that is to exert force arbitrarily, say yay in one area and nay in the other one. And we are complaining as lay people right now about it because it affects us through the vaccine mandates. But in fact, we should have been having and making a ruckus about this far before this point.
That's very true. I mean, the only reason that we're talking about it now is because it does affect us. Prior to this, we were, those of us who were comfortable and all of that, we didn't even, like Brother Hank was saying, we didn't really pay attention to what the church was doing because we just trusted. And I think there were some of us who felt like, if I'm busy doing ministry, doing God's work, and I keep my eyes focused on the right thing, I won't have time to criticize. Why would I criticize the church? right? And so I think there is that tendency still for some people who aren't affected by these mandates, maybe because they haven't felt the same that we do, to think that way about what we're talking about here today. And so this is why we want to do everything that we are doing with the right spirit and that type of thing. So we just want to,
Joyce,
yes.
I had a couple of other comments to make on this issue. Number one, John the Baptist, you know, some people say, oh, we shouldn't get involved in politics, but John the Baptist's role was to check Herod's iniquity, as it were. And so King Herod was functioning as in the capacity of the state. And I would say that God's role for the church, not just the Seventh-day Adventist church, but his body of believers, is to check the overreach of the state. But what we are having now is the churches are carrying out the state's overreach in mainstream society and then in regular society. And then the second issue, one of the biggest reasons that I continue to be especially concerned about the banning of the pastors is because this is not the last issue that we are seeing. We are seeing end time issues. We are now in the end game, and we are going to have issue after issue. And we are in a role where our spiritual fabric is being unraveled. And the best way to go through life, anybody knows this, is with community. And if your pastor is not over a vibrant, active, and engaged church, then you are lacking in community. And this not only affects the church body, it affects the secular culture, because we should be carrying out the mandate of the church to our neighborhood and ripple out further. And it's pretty terrible.
Yes. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for your article. Thank you for taking such a role in this. And I'm going to let Brother Hank say something, and then Pastor Larry Alexander asked me, please let Pastor Larry finish his thoughts. So I'm going to let you do that. Sorry for interrupting you. And so, Brother Hank, why don't you go first?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to caution, we need to be very careful with the language. This statement did not originate from the church. It's being misrepresented as a statement of the church, but it originated with a small group in the leadership of the church. And if we're careful with our language, I think it will foster greater unity amongst the membership, because we don't have an issue with the church, but we would like this small group of leadership to be held accountable for what we perceive to be them creating the conflict and the tension in the church with these unauthorized statements.
Thank you so much for clarifying this, that this is a small group within church leadership and not the church. This is not the church. Okay, and Pastor Larry.
Just to respond, and then before I get to my third section, just to take for an example, Stephen Bohr. Stephen Bohr is an ordained minister. He's not under any church discipline. He's clean as a whistle. Now, who knows if he always will be? God willing, he always will be. But for Rocky Mountain Conference or any other conference, and there's other people we could add to the list who've been barred from presenting in different places. There's an interesting list of people there. But anyway, just to take him as an example, Rocky Mountain Conference has zero authority, zero legitimacy to ban him. If he was teaching that, you have to wear blue socks or you go forever burning hell, they could bar him legitimately. But he's not teaching anything but the regular Adventist thing. So Rocky Mountain had zero legitimacy to bar him. And the local church, in fact, I think if I remember right, that church had the meetings anyway, but I think they rented the hall separately or something. But really, the conference had no business in any way, shape, or form barring him. And the church, by congregation by right, should have had him right there in their church. I guess each congregation has to decide how firm they're going to be with the conference. But the lay people who can be a lot firmer with the conference.
So
And
that was
some
my
of them we need-
question here. They're putting this on the agenda, saying that the conference is going to be the one that sets the guidelines for who is safe for the pulpit. You know, this is what's going to be here on the agenda. And so what recourse do churches have if your conference tells you to do something and you have to go outside the church building, it seems then?
So the fact is that this item was, I've only been to one annual council in my life, and that was annual council 2017. This was brought up at annual council 2017, and they go through these annual councils, and then they finally are, I'm sorry, that was a general conference. Yeah, it was general conference, annual council. And then they bring whatever they have to the GC for, you know, addition to the church manual finally. This was brought up at that time, and I didn't like it then. Because now what you presently have is this. Probably every conference, at least every conference I've served in, they have a list of approved speakers. And so these are like retired ministers, they're various lay people. And the fact is that there's not enough, there's enough pulpits in the conference. There's not enough speakers, even pastors, you know, have to alternate between churches and so on. So a lot of lay people get to speak, and that's a very healthy thing for the church. The fact is that conferences already have a list of approved speakers. We sometimes we use those people to speak. Sometimes we just use our local people, and sometimes we use other people. We probably don't pay a lot of attention sometimes to those lists. This proposed change moves it from the list of people who were suggested or whatever, and now it kind of says it's only those that we approve. But you know, the conferences are have been very loose with following the church manual anyway. Like you go to Oregon conference and it's like the Wild West. Some conferences don't do anything with the church manual. The church members need to be very firm in upholding their rights, respectful but definite. And if you're in a situation, you're a layperson, one of the things that really needs to happen is that the lay people need to demand accountability. So let's say your conference is getting a new conference president. And so let's say you turn out to be one of the people on the nominating committee. So they interview John Smith, who's going to be the new conference president for your conference. While you're on that nominating committee, you should ask him directly when you interview him. Maybe it's a Zoom interview, maybe it's live, whatever. You should say in a respectful way. You should say, so John Smith, we're glad you're willing to interview with us. I do have a question that's very meaningful to me and many of our members in our conference. Some pastors and speakers are being illegitimately suppressed. And I wonder that if Doug Batchelor or if Stephen Bohr or somebody was invited to speak in this conference and maybe you didn't like it for whatever reason, but there was no legitimate reason to suppress him. I want to know, and I want to know right now in plain language, yes or no kind of language, is that something you would ever conceive of doing? It's suppressing a speaker who's in regular standing, who's not under church discipline. Would you even conceive of that? Because if you would even conceive of that, then my vote will be no. I couldn't possibly put my name behind having somebody like that serve as the spiritual leader of my conference. What's your answer? We need to be a little bit, and maybe that's coming across as overly firm, but I think we're in a time when we need that kind of reaction.
Pastor Larry, though, didn't Hank and his church try to do that? And then weren't they given the runaround because they actually sent a letter from a business meeting in a church, and then they had to go through this next level of leadership? And then how many levels did they have to go through? You know, and then finally the church says, sorry, but we're not going to pay any attention, and this is not going to get any attention from us anyway.
Well, there's three solutions to all these things. One is you need to refresh leadership at the General Conference Executive Committee, and that's going to happen this week. Will it be a big enough refresh? I don't know. I sort of have doubts, but I hope it will. So you need to refresh your leadership, because basically if you want to change positions, we can argue all day long, we can send letters, we can write petitions, but at the end of the day, it seems to me that what you really need to do is change the people who were in positions. And that's really what it boils down to, is changing those people. So we need refresh of the GC Executive Committee leadership. Number two, we need lay people to demand accountability, and sometimes you can do it more effectively than others. Writing letters from a standpoint may not be that effective, but it's still worth doing perhaps. And the third thing, and I think the thing that is to me the most current thing, is we need to have a development of grassroots initiatives led by lay people. I mean, what would the church do if there were 50 groups across the United States of lay people who were meeting respectfully, kindly, spiritually, and they were addressing health issues and maybe this mandate question and the vaccine question? What if you had 50 or 100 groups of Seventh-day Adventists who kindly but definitely say the 2015 statement is unsatisfactory, it simply needs to be withdrawn, and while you're at it, withdraw the fall statement in 2021 and withdraw take down the February 28 statement. This stuff is inappropriate. We want it out of there. If there were 50 or 100 groups of Adventists across the division who were calling for this, or were just meeting in spite of it, like the Clergy for Conscience says, it doesn't say you have to change anything. It says, this is what we believe and this is what we're going to do. We're going to write letters of exemption for our church members. We believe that's appropriate. If there were lay people who were doing grassroots initiatives, I guarantee you that some of the leaders are going to sit up and take notice. But if you send them emails and publish nasty videos against them, probably less effective mostly. But if people are actually just going forward and doing something and combining their energies in a positive way, that will get noticed. But if there's not enough interest in that, that probably, the things will carry on kind of in the bad way that they've been carrying on.
I'm going to let everybody say something before we finish here. I just want to say a lot of people are asking, how do we get a list of delegates? That list is super secret. It seems nobody knows. And but Hank was able to find out who his delegates were by calling as many pastors as he could. And it was very difficult, but you were able to find out who your delegates were, weren't you?
Yeah, I think you should start with your local conference. So they should know who is the delegates for that, who are the delegates for that conference. The size of the delegation, I don't know if it's a fixed number or if it depends on the membership in that conference, but call your local conference, they should know. And then, I don't know, beyond conference, who else gets to go, but it's usually your conference president and then some member who perhaps can pay his own way or wants a holiday abroad, but that's how it works.
Yes. And so you found out it's two people from your conference, one who is one of the conference presidents, and
Yes.
then someone who is able to make it to the
Yeah.
United States or wherever
Yeah.
okay. And it is hard to find out your delegates. We've found that out. But so what I would like to ask our panelists here to share is if you were able to, since it's so hard to find out who our delegates are, even though they represent us, if we have any delegates watching, and I pray that we do, we're praying for you. I just want our delegates to know that we are praying for you. And we thank you for what you're doing for the church body. And we just really pray that you understand how serious these issues are and how many people they're impacting. So if we could start with Jonathan, then Pastor Larry, Joel, and then Hank. And then if you were able to send a message to the delegates, what would you ask them?
So I appreciate what you're saying. And I'm actually a delegate, so I will be there.
Send your emails to that guy.
Yeah, you can send emails to me, but I'm only one voice in 2000 and or however many delegates there are. And this is my first time ever being a delegate, although I've attended in the audience a number of times in the past. I think that as far as answering your question, then I want to make one point after that. I think that the thing you need to say to your delegates is it's going to be way too late, I think, to persuade them on any of the core issues. If you haven't been working with them, talking to them about that, you're never going to get anywhere. But I think that the most important thing to do is tell them that they need to vote their conscience and that they need to be aware of the issues and that they need to, that you're praying for them and then maybe, you know, if they give you an opportunity to share. But all this stuff with the vaccines are extremely polarizing, and I think most of us are probably already polarized in one side or another, although I try to keep as open minded as I can. There's another thought, though, that I want to leave everybody with. I was having a conversation with the high-ranking church official in the last couple of days, and we were talking about the General Conference and what's going on. And he was sympathetic to everything. He would be sympathetic, I think, to everything that was said here. And one of the observations that we both made, we both shared, this COVID pandemic, I think, has taught us that in times of crisis, we're going to have to stand alone. And I think that this is just a little tiny actual gift from God to prepare us for bigger crises that are coming our way. And I think it's super important for us to not become too focused on our church as much as we love our church. We have a real true gospel to share. And as critical as I may be of some aspects of the church, I love this church and I absolutely love the doctrines. We need to focus on our personal lives. We need to focus on our personal preparation and actually doing what Christ would have us to do. I mean, there's a world out there to be warned and to be saved. And we should spend time trying to help our church be the most effective church that it possibly can be. But we also need to take care of this personally too, because this is a personal fight. And we need to be sure that we're good representatives of Christ in everything in all of our daily life and just everyone we come into contact with. And so I think we shouldn't, I just want to be sure we keep our eye on the main thing. And the main thing is Jesus, the three angels message, and getting through to the end time. And so I think, you know, to the extent that we can impress our delegates with that about ourselves, I think we'll have more influence. I also think that over time, having that is our main thing. I've been a part of a ministry that's been at times perhaps suppressed. I don't really want to say that because our relationships with the powers that be are good, but at the same time, I think the thing that saved us when we were doing things that the church maybe didn't really want, wasn't really on their agenda, was the fact that they could see our sincerity. And I also think that we prayed a lot, and God had a lot of providence helping us. So anyway, I just hope that I can help people to stay on the main thing.
Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. And, you know, as somebody who does ministry, like all of you, I really do struggle with that myself too. It's like sometimes you're doing ministry and you forget this is the most important thing, this relationship with Jesus. And, you know, so thank you for that. It's something that we all have to keep in mind. Pastor Larry.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I wanted to thank you for inviting me to come and share a little bit. I appreciate that.
Thank you for coming.
My third point kind of goes along with some kind of thought I would have for GC delegates. The third point is that the church has failed fairly dramatically to address the globalist technocracy, big pharma, big government, medical cartel. The church has dramatically failed to address that. I know in 2015 that probably wasn't on their radar. They probably had no clue really how far down the way. None of us, most of us probably didn't quite either. So I agree. I give them that. But I think the church has responded very poorly. You know, and they say that, you know, big tech moves 3 times faster than the government in addressing things. Sorry, they say the big tech moves 3 times faster than normal businesses. And then they say the government moves 3 times slower than normal businesses. And I'm not quite sure what speed the church goes in relation to those, but I don't think it's on the fast end. I think that what we have is a case where we, I'll stop ringing just now. Am I still there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. What I was saying was that that the church hasn't addressed these things well, and I understand it's hard, but that is really giant because trust, even in the best times, trust is a very fragile thing. But we're basically looking at a cataclysm of trust in the church. That's really where we are. I mean, we were like one person away, one Supreme Court justice away, some of us, from perhaps having our ministry dramatically changed, because if the conferences would say you must receive this experimental treatment, or you're out, there's a lot of us that would have said we're going to continue giving the third angel's message, but not with that. So the church has dramatically failed. I don't really expect it to particularly be addressed at this GC session. It would be nice if it was. My statement to the GC delegate would be this, and I'm not trying to point to any particular person, but the General Conference Executive Committee in particular, we need fresh people on the GC Executive Committee. We need to be able, as a church, to be able to address the suppression of people. We need to be able to address, do something about kind of catching up with how rapidly things are changing and have an intelligent spiritual response to it as a church. We need basically a lot of new blood in the mix, because the current GC Executive Committee, and there's many very good people on the current GC Executive Committee, but the current GC Executive Committee has simply not been effective in addressing at least some things. And so I would say we need more lay involvement, lay people, whatever the GC does or doesn't do, lay people need to start grassroots initiatives and do stuff sort of maybe out, you can do it through your conference or your local church, but even if that isn't appreciated, do it independently, do it distinctly as a distinct movement of lay people. Some of the things like Liberty and Health have done, like the Clergy for Conscience group of pastors has done, there needs to be some way of catching up with this. So I would say the GC delegates, yes, I agree with Dr. Joyce. We're praying for you. We want good things. We're not against you. We're living in dramatic times, and the church is behind, but God can help us. So anyway, I hope for good things, and I will be praying for you all during the GC meeting, and I pray that you will be led by the Holy Spirit, and that God will bring some kind of freshness upon his church in spite of some of the things that have been left incomplete.
Brother Joel, thank you so much, Pastor Larry. And Brother Joel, what would you say to the delegates?
Yeah, I think it's very important also what Larry said before, that we really need to get together more people. It's not just individuals writing to the GC, but if we could get together, and also whole churches, for example, writing to the GC, and yeah, coming in together in different ways, showing what we want, then that will have more effect. And I want to ask our delegates to especially pray for our church. I think that's very important. We are in serious times really now. It's very short. We don't have much time left. And I want to say also that these questions are questions that really will determine the future of the path as our church. It will be either this or the other way. And both the question about giving more power to conferences to stop speakers from talking in our churches, for example. We have had this issue here also in Sweden. There are quite a lot of speakers that are not allowed into our country. For example, Doug Batchelor and I don't know about Stephen Moore, but Walter Fight, for example, also. He's not welcomed here. And also the question then about the religious exemption and ADCOM statements, and that the delegates really think for whom they are voting, that those persons that they are voting for, that they try to figure out if they are in agreement with both our health message, what we believe, and other things that could affect these issues here that we have talked about. And I really think that it is time for God to intervene somehow. I don't know how, but for all of those delegates that are there now, I think it will. It's really a special time of being a delegate, I would say, and I will also continue to pray for you.
Thank you, Brother Joel. And Hank, what are your words to the delegates?
I would just plead with the delegates to be realistic. This GC was postponed for 2 years for a reason. That reason is a globally impacting reason. And this pandemic has become, whether planned or unplanned, it has become a convenient excuse for infringement upon liberty. And what I can see is infrastructure is being put in place, which ultimately could be calibrated to target our worship very easily. And thus we can see that truly we're on borrowed time. Now, as I said, we cannot change the prophetic calendar. These things must happen. But my question is, why do you, as a leader in the church, who should know about the prophetic calendar, who should know about the threats to religious liberty, why should you stand disinterested, stand reckless towards our faith? And therefore, I urge you, really ask yourself, do you agree with our church supporting, in a blanket statement, a medical treatment that has known adverse effects? How can you endorse that in a blanket statement? A medical treatment that is made by fallible humans, which means it's not the inspired truth of God. A medical treatment which they say is the only solution to this pandemic, which again is fallible humans insisting on knowing the solution. How can you stand by that? Should you not say that truly the church leadership, the GC ADCOM, has overstepped the boundaries, and therefore it's not on the agenda, but raise the matter, raise it at every opportunity, urge that engagement, demand that engagement, such that they can see where the pulse of the church truly lies. The membership is not on the side of these statements. By far, the membership is saying, leave it to my personal decision making and leave it to me to be directed by my conscience. And I think if we can do that, and there's a nice way out. If GC ADCOM from now on, and for all historically made statements, if they make the statement provisionally for it to be ratified at the next GC, then at least there's a correction mechanism. At this stage, there is nothing like that. So put these statements up, starting with the vaccination statement, because that's the most urgent. Put it up, and let's see where the church truly stands. And if the church wants to embrace it, I don't find it in the Bible, then we'll have to reconsider. But I can tell you, the church people know the Bible, and they won't be endorsing this in such a blanket statement. That's very clear. And that's why delegates, you know where the church is. So stand up, step up, speak up, and be counted. Now's your time to be Ezekiel, the watchman on the wall. Speak up. Now's your time to be a Daniel. Don't take the meat from the king's table. Now's your time to be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Don't bow before that idol. Stand up.
Praise the Lord. Thank you very much. I just want to share with people, and including our delegates, and to let you know something is that, I was just watching a Walter Veith video where he was talking about what happened to him when he was, I guess something happened so that he was no longer able to speak in churches in Germany. And it was that there was an Adventist pastor in Germany who had kind of accused him of something. What was it that
Going
he was?
against the Jews.
Oh, he was anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Yes, right. So that's what happened. And so he went through a lot of legal battles and that type of thing in Germany. And so he was no longer able to speak in Germany. And the church did not stand up for him there, apparently. And the Adventist pastor that did this was an Adventist pastor who apparently is leading the way as far as the ecumenical movement in Germany, and also has been seen to bow before a Roman Catholic idol. And there is no, Walter Weitz reported this on a video, lots of people watched, and yet there's nothing coming to the church asking, why is nobody saying anything about this? Why is this pastor in Germany still allowed to call himself a Seventh-day Adventist pastor? Why do we lay people allow this? Why are we allowing this?
I think he may have left the church now.
He may have left the church.
Yeah, I understood that from Walter Veit's last episode on that
Okay.
matter.
I haven't watched that, but thank you for clarifying this, but that does not mean that we as a Seventh-day Adventist church did anything right. We as our church people, we should have said something. We should have done something. We as church people, this is absolute, we should have been up in arms about this. An Adventist church pastor bowing in front of an idol and being a pastor, So it's not just vaccines, but we are letting a lot of things go. We are letting a lot of things into our Seventh-day Adventist church, into our beloved church. And this is setting a bad precedent for the world. They are not able to see Jesus. They're not able to see a clear image of who Jesus is. And it's not just the vaccine. So I just want to encourage my brothers and sisters to take a stand, to speak up, to let your church leaders know what you believe to be right. Many of our church leaders, they are, they're scared too. And so we have to give them courage. We have to pray for our church leaders and give our church leaders courage. And so that's what we want to do for you. We want to do that for our delegates today. And I just want to thank Jonathan, Pastor Larry, Joel, Hank for being here, Natalie for being here and for sharing your articles. And thank you, everybody. Next week, we're going to be here once again. I've asked Dr. Brian Artis to come, and he is not a Seventh-day Adventist, but he has made some videos that talks about his opinion as far as what's happening with the COVID pandemic and the Catholic Church. And I just thought it'd be interesting to have a discussion. So hopefully it'll happen. And yes, but thank you very much. And as we close, Pastor Larry, would you mind praying for us?
Sure. Let's pray together. Dear Father in heaven, it's a serious time. The delegates are gathering now to conduct the GC session. We are both, by your design, we are both a church and a movement. May we, even if there's things that don't go the way we think they should in terms of different decisions and so on, help us not to forget that we are also a movement, and that it is in our power, because you've put it in our hands, to act on behalf of Jesus, to act on behalf of present truth and the third angel's message. So please be with the church in its combined capacity at the GC session. Please, Lord, we pray as different leaders are appointed to serve, and different persons, that you will bring the right names forward, names that are persons that are truly your servants, and remix the deck, Lord. We pray that you will give insight and wisdom to the participants, the delegates in the session. We pray that some of these large issues, the very trust, Lord, of so many of the members in the leadership of your church is dangling in the wind in some sense. Please, Lord, we pray that you will help us to find a path forward to restore trust, not only in Jesus, but in each other. We pray that you will lead to good decisions, if not immediately, then coming along. Please encourage, we pray, Lord, each faithful servant among the lay people, among the pastors, among all the people. And may we not lose heart, even though sometimes our protests or attempts to communicate seem not to have an effect. Lord, we pray that through your influence, they will have the effect that you desire. Please bless Med Missionary and Sister Joyce and all the participants. Lord, we just pray for your working, and we just pray that we might have some small part in your workings in these crazy hours at the end of time. Thank you for the opportunity to walk through these hours with Jesus. We thank you for this, and we pray for your empowerment in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you so much, everybody. And we will post some of these links. Brother Hank will send them to me, and I'll post them in the description for YouTube. We're also on Rumble and BitChute. And so thank you. Please share this with your friends and your family, and join the Pearl group, and pray for Jonathan Zirkle. He's going to be a delegate. And so we'll be praying for you as well as all the other
Thank you.
delegates. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.